In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, Amen. Christus Anesti to everybody. And we're going to, it's not here in the Bibles, it's Judith, the book of Judith. So it's in the, on this one. It's in the Orthodox Study Bible. Second canonical books, which the church takes them as also in educational, inspirational books that are found in the Septuagint translation, and the church adopts them. In chapter 3, well, the book talks about the era of Nebuchadnezzar swallowing up the kingdom of the Assyrians and the kingdom of Israel, and then the kingdom of Israel. We're going to read it again in chapter 3. We read chapter 3 last time before the feast, before the Holy Week, how they just gave in to him right away. So we'll read it again to remind us how stark a difference is between chapter 3, the kingdom of Israel, and how the kingdom of Judah did not accept to fall into his hand. And we'll see what happened, how God delivers the people of Israel through this lady, Judith. Table of content is in the beginning. And Judith will show us a similarity to David, how David, in fact, how we'll see what she will do with the leader of the kingdom, of the army of Nebuchadnezzar. So let's just remind ourselves how Israel fell into his hand, and they made themselves their slaves, the slaves of the army led by Holofernes. Into chapter 3, Judith 3, just to see the difference between Judith 3 and Judith 4. It's a different story. They therefore sent messengers, they, the kingdom of Israel, the north, to him to sue for peace. To him means Holofernes. Holofernes is the leader of, and we read this, the deliverance of the people from Holofernes in Bright Saturday. It was one of the deliverances of the Lord. We talked Bright Saturday, all of the prophets about deliverance from the hand of Satan, which is in fact what God did on Good Friday to open Hades and deliver the righteous from the hand of Satan. So that's the reading of Bright Saturday reflects this, that Christ is not dead, he's in the tomb, his body is in the tomb, but there is deliverance that happened. So we read all of the stories of deliverances, and in it also delivering who delivered the Israel from the hand of Holofernes by Judith. They therefore sent messengers to him to sue for peace in these words, they, the kingdom of Israel, I'm repeating, and this is what they are saying. We, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, so no, not servants of God, the great king, lie prostrate before you, bowing down before Holofernes. Do with us whatever you will. See our buildings and all our land and all our wheat fields and all our flocks and herds and all our encampments lie before you. Do with them as you please. Our towns and their inhabitants are also your slaves. Come and deal with them as you see fit. What a selling out, and not even believing in deliverance of God whatsoever. Chapter 3. The men came to Holofernes and told him all this. Then he went down to the seacoast with his army and stationed garrisons in the fortified towns and picked men from them as auxiliaries, because they're not all his slaves. And usually there's fortifications on the seacoast because you try to protect from any attacks from the sea. These people are all in the countryside. Those people and all in the countryside welcomed him with garlands, maybe crowning him even, like you're our king, and dances and tambourines. Yet he demolished all their shrines and cut down their sacred groves, for he had been commissioned to destroy all the gods of the land, so that all nations would worship Nebuchadnezzar alone, and that all dialects and tribes should call upon him as a god. Then he came down to Estradilion, near Dothan. Dothan is the place where the brothers of Joseph were. They told Jacob that they are in Shechem, but they went to Dothan, which is an act of lying basically, They were not as honest with Jacob as Joseph was. Facing the great ridge of Judea. Now his eyes are on Judea. After Israel fell and they are becoming his slaves, he camped between Geba and Scythopolis. These names could be Greek names because, as we said, this is Septuagint translation, so it could be more relevant to give them their Greek name because it's translated for Ptolemy in Egypt, the Greeks in Egypt after the fall of Alexander the Great. The Greeks divided into 3 kingdoms, one in Macedonia, which is the initiation of the whole kingdom under Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, and then one in Israel. Palestine is called, under Epiphanes, Antiochus Epiphanes, and then in Egypt it had several series of rulers, but they were benevolent to the Jews in Egypt, and Ptolemy the 4th or the 5th wanted to translate the holy books because he made there was the biggest library that Alexander did in Alexandria. So he wanted to collect in it all of the books, also of the religious books of all of the people, to make it the biggest library ever. So we get the Septuagint translation because of this, which happened roughly in 286 BC. So maybe these names will not read them in the Old Testament that's written in Hebrew, but we'll find them in Greek, because also probably these towns now were existing at that point in Greek names. So anyway, he camped there. Now he's going to beat Judah because there's nothing none of the armies of the world stopped against him, and remained for a whole month in order to collect all the supplies for his army. Very smart, because he's not going to attack. He's going to make sure the food is available, all of the supplies of the army, in terms of lodging, in terms of sustaining them, so they're not going to attack and all of a sudden we ran out of food. So he's going to make like a very, very persistent existence facing Judah. Now we get into the how Judah will differ than the kingdom of Israel. When the Israelites living in Judea heard of everything that Holofernes, the general of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians or Babylonians, technically he's the king of Babylonians, but maybe this transfer over, he's called Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, because he beat the Assyrians, so he's now ruling over them. But officially in the Old Testament, he's the king of Babylonians who beat the Assyrians. So we don't have to consider this a mistake in the scripture. Beating the Assyrians means he becoming a king on the Assyrians. The king of the Assyrians had done to the nations and how he had plundered and destroyed all their temples. They were therefore greatly terrified at his approach. They were alarmed both for Jerusalem and for the temple of the Lord their God, for they had only recently returned from exile, and all the people of Judea had just now gathered together the sacred vessels, and the altar and the temple had been consecrated after their profanation. So they sent word to every district of Samaria, and to Kona, Beth-horon, Belmain, Jericho, and to Choba and Isora and the valley of Salem. They immediately seized all the high hilltops and fortified the villages on them, and stored up food in preparation for war, since their fields had recently been harvested. So it's perfect timing. That could have been calculated that we're gonna have enough food because it's right at the harvest time. So now they are very well nourished, very well sustained for a long period of time, and they're gonna surround Judah till it falls. The high priest Joachim, who was in Jerusalem at that time, wrote to the people of Bethulia and Thaim, which faces Esdraelon, opposite the plain near Dothan, so now very close to where Holofernes has reached, ordering them to seize the mountain passes, since by them Judea could be invaded. If you're going to attack a city, you're not going to just drop down a mountain. You're going to see if there's any cracks between the mountain and use them as an easier slope to get into the the plain. Since by them Judea could be invaded, so the king did a smart thing. Sorry, the high priest advised a very wise advice. And it would be easy to stop any who tried to enter, for the approach was narrow, wide enough for only 2 at a time to pass. So if the army gets into this constriction, and you make this constriction blocked or give everybody that passes, you can inflict quite a bit of harm to the army. So he asked to seize the narrow paths that are between the mountains that surround Judah. So the Israelites did as they had been ordered by the high priest Joachim. High priest means Judea, because the temple is not in the north, the temple is in Jerusalem. So by automatically he will be definitely not within the side of Israel. Just another support that are now looking, the army is at Judea now. And the council of the whole people of Israel in session at Jerusalem. Here it is, biggest evidence. And every man of Israel cried out. So this is different than the north. The north, when we read chapter 3, they're getting ornaments, they're crowning Holofernes to be over them, take anything you want from us, basically to avoid the butchering that they do to other nations. They give in and even crown them as king over them. Israel is, by men of Israel here meaning the south. So the Jews in the south, the Jews in the kingdom of Judea, because the kingdom of Israel gave in quickly. There's no war even, they just crowned him, celebrated him, and told him, you rule over us, take whatever you want. Of course, take whatever you want. These people are not benevolent, they're going to harm the people and the women and all of these horrific things that an army can do to an army or a nation that's under their control. And every man of Israel cried out to God. So see now the difference. Now we see the difference. People who are sticking close to the temple and people who are far from the temple. People who still worship God and people who invented other gods for themselves. And even these other gods didn't protect them, because Holofernes killed these other gods. It says in chapter 3 that he removed all of the high areas. Israel had that problem. Judah had that problem also. When you read in the first and second Kings, you find even the good kings, except probably Yehoshaphat, I think it's Yehoshaphat, that they were good, but they left also some worship into the high places. Like they didn't. It's a very common phrase that repeats verbatim, like cut and paste, with the kings of Judah. So any king should have either Jehoshaphat or maybe Asa. Maybe Asa, not Jehoshaphat. Maybe Asa is the only king who really took care of these areas. I need to go and revise First and Second Kings. This beautiful book. Anyway, it's gonna get interesting. See the stark difference between people crowning the devil over them and people say, let's cry to God and let's try to do in our best. Let's all of these narrow paths in the mountains, we have to control them because the army cannot pass there except 1 or 2 soldiers at a time. So God is giving ideas to the high priest, as he gave ideas to Basalael to build or engineer really the building of the Ark of Covenant and all of the tabernacle and all of the details of it, as Moses is describing to him. God gave him intelligence and with his team to do it. 9. And every man of Israel cried out to God with great fervor, not favor, fervor, zeal. Very, very elegant word for zeal. And they humbled, the beauty of the GRE verbal section, to prepare for it in Egypt. I crammed 3,500 words. It was very helpful. And it's so like, wow, this word means this. It's like words I've never seen ever before. One of them is fervor. So whenever I say it, I remember this.
Probably never saw again until today.
No, it helps. It helps in writing. It's. No, I remember. I remember them. Not all of them, but. The amount of synonyms, and in GRE they give you the antonyms. I don't know what GRE is in the verbal section now, but They don't ask for the synonym, they ask for the antonym. So you have to know the synonym really well in order to find the opposite for it. It's tricky. That was Holofernes for me. But by God's grace, we beat it. So whenever I see fervor, I remember the GRE fervor section. And they humbled themselves with much fasting. So prayer, fasting, God sends ideas to the high priest. They did their part. They're really moving the stone. We're in chapter 4. We read 3 to show the contrast between Jews that are welcoming the king to rule over them and the other Jews who are close to the temple that never sold out, that are basically we're going to do everything in the faith, but it's going to look really bleak and difficult. So we'll see when how God will deliver. Fasting, verse 10. They and their wives and their children and their cattle and every resident, alien and hired laborer and purchased slave, they all put sackcloth around their waists. And this is in fact why some of the people converted to Judaism. I'm just thinking, why Cornelius is interested in knowing the true God? He's a Roman centurion. He's enjoying every privilege. What made him get interested in God? How does he know God? The only thing are the gods of the Roman Empire. And this is hypothesis, is probably living among the Jews. He would see them, although they are tough people, but the way they worship, the way of cleanliness, the way of like being very picky on sin, yeah, it's negative, the way they did it. But it's also positive, how he didn't see their heart, but how they are trying to apply certain rules. And the adultery is not permissible, observing a certain day for worship. These things might have impressed him that he really wanted to know the true God.
I learned a little bit about this.
Please enlighten me. So I'm saying it's hypothesis, and I want to see who can find evidence for it or against it.
Well, I don't have.
You talk about Cornelius?
Not Cornelius specifically, but the Jews who they called them God-fearers, or the Gentiles who liked Judaism but they did not convert, but they were interested in Judaism. They called them God-fearers. And part of what I learned, like, made Judaism appealing to them is that the Gentile gods didn't have any, it wasn't, you're not a moral God, it's just wrathful gods, and we want to be in their favor, otherwise they'll destroy us. But the God of Israel cares for his people and like is with his people and is monotheistic, and so like just all of that together, in addition to the fact that the Gentile gods, they don't love their people, you're just scared of them, and you don't want their wrath on you.
Nice, very, very nice, and makes perfect sense. So that's would make somebody think of who's the true God that of the Jews is. It puts it in Greek context.
Yeah, every time.
No, that was already known before. So Matanias, so we have fasting, we have prayer, and then 11 is prostration. And all the Israelite men, women, and children living in Jerusalem prostrated themselves before the temple and put ashes on their heads and spread out their sackcloth before the Lord. They even draped the altar with sackcloth and cried out in unison, praying fervently to the God of Israel not to allow their infants to be carried off and their wives to be taken as plunder. These wives will be used horribly, and the towns they had inherited to be destroyed. Inherited means as after the became the promised land, inherited after it was lost for when they were in Egypt. And the sanctuary to be profaned, and desecrated to the malicious joy of the nations. So Israel, this is only one pocket that Holofernes has not invaded, this area of Judea. The Lord heard their prayers. We see this in Tobit. We see this is Simon, Zacharias and Elizabeth. The Lord heard your prayers. So fasting and praying and prostration is not an empty practice. And sometimes God waits till this is done and He interferes. He's not indifferent. Like God will do whatever He wants. No, He will do it after you pray and prostrate and fast. And sometimes if we don't do it, He will not interfere. The Lord heard their prayers and had regard for their distress, for the people fasted many days throughout Judea and in Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord. So always compare chapter 3 and chapter 4. This is a big difference, and this is the difference between how do we behave when we are defeated. Are we going to give in to the devil, which is chapter 3, or are we going to do the right thing even there's no chance of winning? The high priest Joachim and all the priests who stood before the Lord and ministered to the Lord with sackcloth around their loins offered the daily burnt offerings, the votive offerings, which is vows, and free will offerings of the people. This is free will, I think, might be the peace offering. With ashes on their turbans, they cried out to the Lord with all their might to look with favor on the whole house of Israel. So they are not happy that the northern kingdom fell, although they are not worshipping God as they should, and that's why they didn't even try to fight Holofernes. When you get away from God for a while, your methods of fighting evil becomes worldly methods. They're no longer holy. You don't rely on prayer much because it doesn't make sense, or it takes a long time to deliver a result, and hence people fall away from it, and there's the shortcut of doing what's in your hand, which is usually can be successful if the person is God-fearing and in the mood of in the mode of fasting and prayer. Or it could be human interaction, because this is what, due to distance from the church or distance from the submission to God, uses human methods. So 3 and 4 is the core of this book, in comparison between how do I handle myself when I'm surrounded from every direction. Do I do it like the northern kingdom, Israel? I crown the devil and I go by his methods, or I'll just do what seems to be doesn't gain anything. Fast, pray, prostrate, offer things on the altar, which means basically go and take communion, shut yourself in and pray. Things that don't deliver anything, because I don't hear the voice of God as a response. I don't have a solution, and He doesn't talk to me. So it seems to be like the long-winded approach. 5. It was reported to Holofernes, the general of the Assyrian army, that the people of Israel had prepared for war. So Joachim, the high priest, actually called for plan for war, plan for defense, by this smart idea of blocking the narrow paths between the mountains, and had closed the mountain passes and fortified all the high hilltops and set up barricades in the plains. Wow, so Holofernes, these people have some audacity, basically. They're not afraid. They didn't hear what I did to the other nations. In great anger, so he's insulted. These people are just going to put up a fight. They're Jews, their northern brothers didn't do anything. They actually welcomed us. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with Judah, with Judea, kingdom of Judah? In great anger, he called together all the princes of Moab, and all the commanders of Ammon, and all the governors of the coastland, and said to them, "Tell me, you Canaanites, what people is this that lives in the hill country?" It's this new type of genes Nobody does this in front of our army. What towns do they inhabit? How large is their army? So now we're going to have a tactical plan how to crush them. Okay, let's evaluate them. So who knows them? Their cousins around them, Moabites, the Ammonites, which are basically under the umbrella of the Canaanites. How large is their army? And in what does their power and strength consist? Call all human evaluation. Who rules over them as a king and leads their army? And why have they alone, look at this verse 4. Why have they alone of all who live in the west refused to come and meet me? Pope Shenouda has a very, very nice sermon on tribulations and says, when the devil comes to tempt you, tell him, okay, you came to your defeat because you don't know who is on my side, or you don't know how the one who's on my side will fight back every war you try to do for me. So it's just, you don't get, as the Bible says, resist Satan and will flee from you. Satan who's on your side, if you decide to make him on your side, but because he attacks knowing that probably you will not resort to God, you might resort to human forces first, and when they fail you will resort to God. So that's why you fall into temptation. That's why I fall into temptation, is that God is not my first resort. There's all of the logic or all of the planning, and then God is part of it, of course, but we have to have God as the first resort. So Holofernes is basically saying what the devil is saying. Why these people didn't come out to give me the honor and the respect and the welcome as Israel did. Then Achior or Ashior.
I'm so sorry. I've been trying to read, skim the last 3 chapters. So in chapter 3, so who were the people who tried to please them?
Israel.
And give it? Israel?
Israel, the northern kingdom, and the kingdom is divided. There's kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah. I said this at the very beginning, that the kingdom of Israel fell into the hand of the Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay. But they still destroyed them.
They became their slaves. This is not going to be benevolent to them. They used their harvest. They became under them, which is wrong. Because under them means you're going to worship their gods.
Mm-hmm. So the southern kingdom are the people who blocked the mountain and
the southern kingdom is the kingdom of Judah is in big trouble because they're surrounded, but they resorted to God. They didn't resort to let's try to talk to him into peace or something. They just, let's do our part, very tiny part, which is a smart idea. Block the passages of the mountains and pray. Fast, pray, prostrate, put ashes, let's offer sacrifices. It's like the repentance of Nineveh. Then Achior, the leader of all the Ammonites, said to him who? To Holofernes.
One more question.
Yes.
To piggyback on that, so when it says in chapter 4, verse 8, it says the Israelites did as instructed, and it refers to the people of Judah as the people of Israel.
No, because they are Jews, children of Israel. Usually, colloquially, means the 12 tribes.
Okay.
Yeah. So they don't. And sometimes they say the people of Judah. I mean, but here's by context, it means that the people of Judah, because Israel, kingdom of Israel fell.
Sorry.
No. Good.
Does that happen at different times in the Old Testament, where part of the people of God are doing the right thing and part of the people of God are not doing the right thing?
Well, this is, if you remember, that it took 3 invasions to Judah to fall into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. The captivity happened to the northern part first. Israel fell into the Assyrians.
Okay.
And the Babylonians, led by Nebuchadnezzar, he's now being called king of the Assyrians. But I think he's called this way because the Babylonians beat the Assyrians. So in the second canonical books, they call them that he's the king on the Assyrians now. There's no more Assyrians. They're all, it's probably the same language, but it's all now led by Nebuchadnezzar. So they call him king of the Assyrians.
Okay.
He's going down to Judah. In the book of Kings, it's summarized like he captures Judah. He taking over the Assyrians and then goes down and captures Judah. It doesn't tell the detail of what happened in Holofernes. Well, there's no mention of it whatsoever. The details is in this book, Judith. When before him, Sennacherib's army, led by Rabshakeh, this is 2 Kings 18 and 19. After beating Israel, he went down and tried to take over Judah. What happened? God sent an angel, killed 185,000, so he could not take Judah. Probably that gave demolition of the king of the Assyrians. And Sennacherib was assassinated by one of his children, Shalmaneser. That actually parallels with Tobit. Tobit at that time was taken captive when we read the book of Tobit, that's the context of Tobit, was taken captive he's living in Nineveh. He was living in Nineveh. So my suggestion in reconciling this, now the Assyrians beat Israel. Tried to go to Judah, 2 Kings 18 and 19. An angel killed their armies under Hezekiah. It was Hezekiah, there was Isaiah, and Hezekiah took the letters of Rabshakeh and showed it to God in the temple, and God sent an angel that demolished the army of the Assyrians. So what happened after that is definitely Nebuchadnezzar defeated that army now, but Israel probably recovered and flourished again. So Nebuchadnezzar with Holofernes, sending Holofernes now to take over everything. So Holofernes is able to take over Israel when Israel in that time probably recovered a little bit because the army of the Assyrians is not as strong as anymore. Now we'll see that they are trying to take Judah, and this is where the book of Judith happens.
Okay.
And we'll see whether they were able to take Judah or not. We know from 2 Kings that at some point Nebuchadnezzar captured Judah and demolished the temple. This is where the temple has been demolished. And he took Daniel and the three holy youths, all of this now, the book of Kings, 2 Kings. So you see how to reconcile the Tobit, Judith, Kings, and that's it.
Thanks.
Yeah, trying. What throws people off, what threw me off is the Assyrian army. You should say the Babylonian army. But then
I was listening to the record, like the live, as I was coming here, and you talked about that, right?
yeah, so it would be logically called the Assyrian if Nebuchadnezzar beat the Assyrian Empire, and then he could be called the head of the Assyrian. They probably got later called Babylonia because he made his capital to be in Babel, not in Nineveh. So it's called the Babylonian Empire. Any other questions?
No.
Do you remember which chapter we're in?
5.
Exactly, because I forgot. I had to look at the number. We finished this part. Verse 5 now. Achior. So we have the cousins of the Jews, the other that is not directly from the 12 tribes, the Ammonites. Ammonites, I think, is the descendants from Lot. And the Moabites and the Edomites, all of these are descendants not from the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why St. Paul, when he introduces himself in Philippians, says Israel from the Pharisee, son of the Pharisee, from Benjamin, from the main stock of Israel. He means from the 12 tribes, main stock. So the Ammonites are not from the main stock, Edomites are not from the main stock, Amorites, the Amorites is one of the 7 nations. and the Edomites are not from the main stock. Main stock means from the 12 tribes, the descendants of the 12 tribes. So Achior actually will play a certain role here, and let's see what he will go and tell Holofernes, because Holofernes is asking who are these people. So Achior will initiate an answer as follows. May my Lord please listen to a report from the mouth of your servant, and I will tell you the truth about this people that lives in the mountain district near you. No falsehood shall come from your servant's mouth. I'm going to be very honest with you. These people are descended from the Chaldeans. At one time they lived in Mesopotamia. That's Abraham. So he's now quoting the whole history. At one time they lived in Mesopotamia because they did not wish to follow the gods of their ancestors who were in Chaldea. Since they had abandoned the ways of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God they had come to know, their ancestors drove them out from the presence of their gods. So they fled to Mesopotamia and lived there for a long time. Then their God commanded them to leave the place. Actually gives a background about Abraham. Then their God commanded them to leave the place where they were living and go to the land of Canaan. So when we think on God called Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans, then somehow Abraham believed in the true God, and he was reviled by the people around him in the area. So God told him, go, I'm going to show you another land you live in. Abraham came from where? Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran, and then to where? Canaan. That's called the Promised Land. Remember Genesis? Ur of the Chaldeans.
You are?
You are.
Okay.
Good one. We needed this break. Ur of the Chaldeans, and then Haran. Haran is who lived Laban, Rebecca, that was his sister, that was taken as a wife to Isaac. So this gives us a background that somehow, all of a sudden, God told Abraham, who's that Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans, and I'm going to move you there. So this is an amazing filler for this, is that Abraham somehow believed in the true God. People around him in the Chaldea had their own gods, and they didn't believe in that God. So God told him, take Lot and leave your family, everybody, and come to the land I will show you. This is the only part that feels why God moved Abraham to live in Canaan, and that became called the Promised Land, the land that he will basically become the place where the temple will be built and becomes God's holy land. There's no dirt happens in it. When they were captured in Egypt, it became dirty by several nations, and God brought them back to clean the land from the dirt that's in it, and not to do the things that people used to do, as he warns them in Leviticus 18. Are you following? This is amazing. That Achior is telling them, God brought our origin from Mesopotamia. We used to live in Mesopotamia. God brought our origin because we believed in the true God. Our ancestors believed in the true God that their ancestors didn't believe in, so they drove them out. And hence Abraham. To go to the land of Canaan. There they settled and grew very prosperous in gold and silver and much livestock. That's of course prior to the Exodus. When a famine spread over the land of Canaan, they went down to Egypt. We know that part, Joseph. And lived there as long as they had food. There they became so great a multitude that their number could not be counted. So the king of Egypt became hostile to them. He exploited them and forced them to make bricks, reducing them to slaves. This is an amazing defense for the Bible. This is like not a fairy tale story. The historical context of the Bible is so important for the authentication of it. That you read this from here, you can immediately put it in the time frame that matches the whole events, in the sequence of events. Exodus, they cried out to their God, and he afflicted the whole land of Egypt with incurable plagues. So the Egyptians drove them out of their sight. Then God dried up the Red Sea before them, and he led them by the way of Sinai and Kadesh Barnea. They drove out all the people of the desert and took up residence in the land of the Amorites. Now these are the people that, one nations that they fought, Og and Bashan, and by their might destroyed all of the inhabitants of Heshbon, and crossing over the Jordan, that's book of Joshua, they took possession of all the hill country. He scanned basically from Genesis to Joshua. He skipped Judges, malish. They drove out before them the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Shechemites, and all the Girgashites, the Hivites, Hittites, and so on. I haven't Shechemites is part of these nations, but they lived in Shechem, so they were called the Shechemites until the Hittites. Thank God it's different because it's not cut and paste from another book. I mean, these are very encouraging things not to say exactly the same. People say, oh, there's difference in the Bible. If it's cut and paste, that will actually would make you doubt more that it is just a replica. Just somebody trying to make new books in the Bible, just cuts and paste from others. That's not the case. I'm imagining listening to Holofernes and the Achior or Ashior is saying, he dried up the Red Sea before them, and Holofernes started like this guy is like messed up completely. Or he's insulting me. He's like to make me feel that we'll see what happens. It's just as long as they did not sin against their God, they prospered. For that God who hates iniquity is with them. That's actually no. Go ahead. I was going to support what you're saying, is that God takes care of them.
I was going to ask, so you said that
I prefer comments more than asking, but it's okay.
So the Ammonites were the cousins. So
not the Amorites.
Ammonites.
Yeah.
But why is he saying their God, not our God? Like, they don't believe in the God of Abraham? The Ammonites? Because isn't Achior the leader of the Ammonites? So he's telling him, let me tell you the story of this people.
No, he believes in him because when he goes, you'll see what happens when he goes down to Judah, they will welcome him. He's not a disbeliever in it.
Oh, it just confused me. He said as long as they did not sin against their God, they prospered. And their God did this and their God.
If he tells them our God...
Oh, that's true.
So he's describing those people. Like, thank God he asked me about those people. So I'm going to allocate everything to them. He didn't ask me about my God. And that in fact differentiates the main stock compared to the other cousins.
Okay, thank you.
That's why, you're welcome. That's why St. Paul boasted that he's from the main stock of Israel. He's like, our stock knows God really, really well.
So he's talking to him right now.
So verse 17, of course, is like the blind man. The blind man who told the Pharisees, it has not been heard that anybody opened the eyes of the blind. And we know that God doesn't listen to sinners. Amazing. Another consistency of the Bible. Like the theme is not just all over the place and you're trying to do every effort to, these verses, love those Christians and Jews, and these verses, kill them whenever you find them, and then like, what happened here? This is black and white. But the reconciliation that happened in the Bible is because the author is one. And I really, really thank God there is difference in the manuscripts and errors in the manuscripts, because it shows that there is a human work, and when there is a human work that's involved in the work of God, there are errors. That's a human error. It's bound to happen. But it doesn't change the theme. This is like 0.5% of all of these verses, which is one theme together. But the danger, which if we hold the Bible only as the faith, without the context of the church, people who did PhDs in the Bible and only believed in the book infallibility, which is true, it's infallible. When they do manuscripts comparison, they found changes, they start doubting the faith. But we don't have that, because the Bible is in the context of the practice. And that's very, very, very much the plan of God, to really have the church in the New Testament come before the book. We can worship and have communion, and we don't have a book called St. John's Gospel. But we're living St. John's Gospel, we were living the resurrection. And it came later to protect us from generation to generation, that it's not just a habit we received, it's really, here is a supporting evidence. And it's not a big evidence. I mean, the size of the New Testament compares to the change that happened in the whole world is trivial, is tiny. There's just like few books. As long as they did not sin against their God, they prospered, for the God who hates iniquity is with them. But when they departed from the way he had prescribed for them, they were utterly defeated in many battles, and were led away captive to a foreign land. The temple of their God was razed to the ground, and their towns were occupied by their enemies. But now they have returned to their God, and have come back from the places where they were scattered, and have occupied Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and have settled in the hill country, because it was uninhabited. That in fact would be confusing, because this would put them after Haggai and Ezra and the return from the captivity. So we have to look at this more. So this few statements, the temple of their God was razed to the ground, but that's Nebuchadnezzar. And then after this came the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire under Cyrus allowed them to go back to build, but they refused. They liked the comfortable life of Persian Empire. And then in the time of Haggai and Nehemiah, then they returned back and built, and Jerusalem was recovered again. So I need to do more homework into putting Nebuchadnezzar right after the Assyrians is better than having this event happening. So I'm now actually need to reconcile, to check exactly where the book of Judith. I wanted to really honest with you that this is describing the demolition of the temple. The demolition of the temple happened only after, as part of the captivity. So, and the coming back and rebuilding, that's Haggai and Nehemiah and Ezra coming and reading the book of the law and recompiling the Old Testament again under Ezra. So anyway, let's leave this for now and continue what happens. In any case, Judah is the only place that's left for Holofernes to show. So we need to,
Was the temple in the north?
No, there's no north temple. Only.
Well, like on a map, like Jerusalem's down here.
Oh, you mean in the kingdom of Judah? It's in the north of the kingdom of Judah? Yeah, Jerusalem still is the north of the kingdom of Judah, but north.
Okay. Well, because I was thinking it said that they went into Jerusalem. Was that the exact same place as where the temple was, or maybe the temple was destroyed and so they went to the uninhabited part?
No, because they came and rebuilt it. It says, their God have come back from the places where they were scattered and have occupied Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is. The thing that's throwing me off is they were led captive to a foreign land. They were not led captive to a foreign land after the temple was built, except the captivity.
But it didn't specifically say that the temple was rebuilt. Does it?
So it's still not.
I don't know.
Sanctuary could be.
But the one who the temple was demolished as part of Nebuchadnezzar taking over Judah. But the events of Judith is that Nebuchadnezzar will not be able to take over Judah. This is the victory that will happen, and we'll see. Let's research it. Let's research it. I'm going to be very honest with you. That's the context of time that we put about the Assyrian matches 2 Kings 18 and 19 very well. And the defeat of Nebuchadnezzar to defeat, the defeat of the Assyrian to overcome Judah. And then Nebuchadnezzar eventually, later on in his empire, he did the captivity with 3 attacks on Judah. It happened over 3 times. This is where the fall of Judah and now the full captivity, temple is demolished, which matches the history of that book. But then Achior says that verse 16, that's after Exodus. That's the book of Joshua. And then verse 18, but when they departed from the way he had prescribed for them, they were utterly defeated in many battles and were led away captive to a foreign land. That's the captivity. Is there another Nebuchadnezzar later on? So this needs studying. Let's look into it. I will need all of your help in this if you can reconcile this. Does it read captivity about Israel only and not about the temple being demolished? But when he says their temple is raised, Achior cannot mean another temple because, maybe because he's not from Judah, could mean because Jeroboam, who's led the division of the empire after Solomon, built for them a temple up there, so they don't go down to worship in Jerusalem. When the kingdom was divided under Solomon, the first feast of the tabernacles is coming. He was afraid that the people, they have to go to Jerusalem to do the tabernacles. So he said he was so fearful they will go back and he will lose the kingdom of Israel. So he built temple for them and priests, something completely forbidden, an abomination, because everything is...
Is that the Sumerians?
Different than the Samaritans. Different than Samaritans. Yeah. But the capital is Samaria. The capital of the kingdom above is Samaria. Yeah, maybe they don't deal with the Jews but the Samaritans, their origin is not related to the division of the empire.
I don't know enough. I'm just confused.
لا صح, the capital of the kingdom of Israel is Samaria, and the capital of the kingdom of Judah is Jerusalem, and that's why they say the Samaritans don't deal with the Jews. Yes, you're not off on this. They took their capital to be the Samaria. It's the most holy place because this is where Jacob, the Samaritan woman was describing to Christ. This is where Jacob built this well and he drank from it, him and his livestock. So Jeroboam made this place to be the holiest place in the kingdom of Israel. And the Samaritan woman told him, which is better, to worship down there or to worship here? And God told her that time is now, everybody will worship God in truth and spirit. Okay. Okay, this part is very important. Okay. So now, my Master and Lord, if there is any oversight in this people and they sin against their God and we find out their offenses, then we can go up and defeat them. So they have to sin to God in order to be defeated. But if they are not a guilty nation, then let my Lord pass them by. Please don't go in. For their Lord and God will defend them, and we shall become the laughing stock of the whole world. So Achior says, I really care for you, Holofernes. Take my advice. I've seen it in their history. Will that please Holofernes? No, he will be feeling so insulted by this. When Achior had finished saying these things, all the people standing around the tent began to complain. Holofernes' officers and all the inhabitants of the seacoast and Moab insisted that he should be cut to pieces. Who should be cut to pieces? Achior. Like you're telling us we can be defeated by some people? They said, we are not afraid of the Israelites, means of here the kingdom of Judah. They are a people with no strength or power for making war. Therefore let us go ahead, Lord Holofernes, and your vast army will swallow them up. Holofernes will not stop here. He will do something to Achior, but we'll leave it till next time. It's 8:30. So let's look into this context of what he means by their temple is raised up and now they returned and they are inhabiting Jerusalem. It threw me off completely. So I apologize. I have to look into more. I have a week. Hopefully in that week we'll figure it out. If you have an expert that knows the Old Testament, ask them, and we'll discuss it next time. Well, in any case, the focus is what will happen. As we said, this book is David and Goliath, but in that case, David is Judith. Judith will play an unbelievable role. That is just, I thought it's very good to study it in the resurrection, where God has slayed the devil, as David has slayed Goliath. Christos Aniski.
Yes, I see.
Let's just look at how to stop it there.